I am not asking you to remove them from the world. On this day, about half the Christian world is celebrating Ascension Day. We had it on the correct day liturgically, which is the Thursday. That's always been the case with the Bishop's mission here. For in the monastic life we have no need to shorten things. We're here just for prayer. But all the Christian world is thinking on this day about what is up there. Our eyes are homeward bound. All the time we are handling people who are going into the beyond. People asked us to pray for this one and that one, and then we hear the person has gone. What do they see? I was moved years ago, standing on the very spot where the Lord ascended. The footprint is still there on Mount Olivet. One can look upwards. The clouds have not changed. There is a mystery in the deep blue. What is up there? We can also pause and ask ourselves in parallel, what is down there? On that level, it's kind of important that the flight goes in the right direction at death. There is, it would seem, an upward or a downward movement of the soul. How can it be? We know not. But there are evidences quite clear that there is movement of the soul at death. St. Michael is involved. He seems to shepherd the souls that are saved into the right place. It would seem that we also see our guardian angel at that point. It would also seem that at that point there is a huge invisible battle going on just before death. The good angels and the bad angels want their bit. And for our own good, we are not allowed to see what goes on one moment after. The Lord is courteous to his creatures, and it's private. It's only at the end of time that we'll know a bit more. Hence the difference between what we call the particular judgment and the general judgment, because it's only fair that we have some idea of where others that we have known have ended up, because what we do to each other is not purely private. I remember being quite shocked one day at table in a monastery near our own. It was a big feast for that monastery, and I was invited to go and celebrate with them. And I was talking to another person who had been invited, a young, holy, fervent Vincentian priest. And he shared something with me. I forget how he started, but he shared it with me, talking about some place he knew. There is there, he said, now do you know what a prie-dieu is? There's one here, you're up there, that's a prie-dieu. It's a kneeler basically. And they've always been used. And there was one of these in somewhere he knew in Italy. But it had come from France, Paris or somewhere, and there's a reason for it having to be moved quickly and out of sight. It was this. Apparently, there was a young man who had an affair with a woman who wasn't free. And I believe that she was the one who died and not prepared, and he was obviously upset that he lost her, and he seemed to have actually been in prayer on that prie-dieu, that kneeler. And what was his shock when she appeared to him in flames and left a trace of her burning on the prie-dieu, therefore still visible, big time. And he was given to understand from what she communicated to him in that flash of time from the beyond, if it weren't for you, I wouldn't be here. Now, we do therefore have an impact on each other, for good or for bad. Remember that, because we're only here once. And the Lord wants us to bring other souls with us at the moment of death, and it depends sometimes on us if they get there. We now are so ashamed of our faith that we don't dare to say anything really when in public or in society. We're actually shy. Well, we don't need to be. If we're talking to other people, young people to young people, one doesn't need to be shy. Why? The weight of evidence is not against us. It's calmly, massively for us. Do you know that it can be proven scientifically that the soul has an independent existence without the brain? Now, do you see how important that is? Until recent years, it was presumed that one had a soul functioning through the brain, and that therefore it would cease to be when the brain ceased to function. Well, if you're talking about this to other young people, you can indicate to them that actually in recent times the scientists themselves have had to surrender to the evidence. And the evidence is this. They have, as science has progressed, been able to do operations which demand clinical death. The brain has to be put in a state where it is no longer alive, clinically. It has to be completely drained, and they can monitor all its movements by high-powered tech. And when it gets to a point that there's no more movement, electrical impulses, they know that then they can drill inside of the brain and do what has to be done. Now, that's therefore indicating that anything that that person may say, when that person comes round afterwards, that person has seen it not through the brain. It's not functioned through the contact with the material, and this is what is coming through. It's constant, and it happens each time. At the moment of clinical death, the soul comes out, looks down on the operation, hears what is being said, and then, if the operation is long enough, it will carry on travelling away from the body, and things will be discovered out there. Do you see how important that is for science? It shows that, therefore, we're not in any way in a position to say that life after death doesn't exist. But on the contrary, we need to be pretty nervous, because actually the chances are that it does, and one can't stop it. And this is what happens. For the first time ever, 1 second after, the soul is no longer able to say where it's going or what it's going to do. It receives. And it receives on the basis of what's happened precisely up until that point. So all its eternal future depends on that point that we call time. And it's going somewhere. Where is it going? It's going to face the one that gave it one and one only ride. Now, do you see why, if talking to other people, they're the ones who need to be slightly nervous? Because they would prefer, actually, that they could cancel the problem. I don't believe, therefore it doesn't exist. Do you see how there's a flaw in that argument? It's saying that I control by my mind what is out there. I don't. I can only hope for the best. Now, there is a philosopher, one of the best that we had in France, Blaise Pascal, who left us his pensées, his thoughts. He had gems like this. Toute la misère de l'homme, all the misery of man, is that he is unable to sit in a room on his own and do nothing. But he also had this one, facing this problem with all his illuminated friends in philosophy. Well, what do? We can't be quite sure. And he goes into it like this. On fait un pari, one makes a gamble. And he goes into it. Look at the consequences. I have an awful lot to lose if my gamble happens to be on the wrong side. Whereas the other way, I have an awful lot to be grateful for. So even he, as a neutral philosopher, was able to see, well look, as the Americans would say, we're dead a long time. In other words, it's a hugely important issue facing eternity with a little bit of time, irreversible, with no dress rehearsal, once only. Now on this day, by thinking about that once only, do you think the Lord didn't know what was facing him when he volunteered in the bosom of the Trinity, I'll go and fix it? He knew exactly what was ahead, and that's why he had to have flesh. It was in that flesh that he had to receive the maximum of torture and pain possible for a man. And with that trophy he returned. And you can say almost in human terms what he would say now. We did it! But we have to collaborate. It's our victory too. We can be serene. But remember now, the massive proportion of men on earth is completely unaware of the real issue. It's rather like the disciples on the way to Emmaus. Can you see them? And right next to them is the King of Kings. That's how humanity is walking, eyes fixed to the material. And the King of Kings is saying, I've got something more in store. I believe in God.